So today, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to hit pause on one single chaotic day in the near future, March 30th, 2026. This was a day that had it all: intense conflict, major economic anxiety, and, believe it or not, a really powerful glimpse of human ambition. Let's try to make sense of all the noise, one big story at a time.
First up, on this one day, the entire world was watching, as a conflict that had been simmering in one part of the world was threatening to just boil over completely, pulling in new players and basically redrawing the planet's battle lines.
And, those shockwaves, they didn't stop on the battlefield, not even close. They slammed into global markets with this staggering force, and they threatened to push a pretty fragile economy right over the edge. And yet, and this is what makes the day so interesting, amidst all of this chaos, a part of humanity was also looking up, getting ready for a journey we hadn't seen in over half a century. So how do all these pieces connect? Well, let's break it down. Okay, so we have to start at the epicenter of it all, the Middle East. A war that was already a month old was starting to expand, and fast, way beyond its original borders. All right, so this really shows you just how explosive the growth of this conflict was. We're not just talking about the ongoing US-Israel-Iran war. Iran's strategy clearly shifted to hitting critical infrastructure. We're talking an oil refinery in Haifa, a desalination plant in Kuwait. The goal? To cripple their neighbors. Then you have Yemen's Houthi rebels officially jumping into the fray, which adds a whole other dangerous layer. And the death of a UN peacekeeper on the Israel-Lebanon border? Well, that just shows you how quickly things were spiraling out of control. It really wasn't one war anymore. It was becoming a massive regional crisis. And just when you thought the stakes couldn't possibly get any higher, this little tidbit leaks from inside the US government. It revealed just how close we were to things getting even worse. The White House was seriously thinking about a direct military op to seize Iran's nuclear material. Now, no final decision had been made, but just the fact that it was on the table, that sent a chill across the entire globe. Of course, a conflict like this is never just about military strategy. Its shockwaves were being felt everywhere, in people's wallets, at gas pumps, and in corporate boardrooms all around the world. And here's the kicker. This is the moment that really panicked the global economy: the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. You have to understand, this is one of the most vital arteries for global energy. A huge chunk of the world's oil flows through there. Shutting it down is like clamping a major vein in the global economy. And boom, here's the immediate impact. The price of Brent crude oil just skyrocketed to $116 a barrel. And this isn't some abstract number on a screen. This was a direct hit to supply chains and what you pay for just about everything. It was the highest price tag on oil since the war began. The situation got so serious that it prompted this really stark warning from the head of the US Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell. Look, when the person in charge of the world's largest economy says patience has limits when he's talking about inflation, the entire financial world just holds its breath. It was a clear signal that some pretty drastic economic measures could be on the way. So the response was pretty much immediate. The world's wealthiest nations, the G7, they scrambled to hold an emergency meeting to talk about releasing their strategic oil reserves to try and calm things down. But the damage was already being done. On the same day, Toyota, the biggest car maker in the world, reported that its production had dropped by almost 4%, and they blamed it directly on slowdowns in China and Japan. That ripple effect was very, very real, and it was spreading fast. So beyond the battlefield and the stock market, March 30th also showed us these deep cracks forming in the world's political landscape. I mean, alliances that had been solid for decades were being tested, and new tensions were flaring up in places you might not expect. For instance, just take a look at this flashpoint in Asia. Beijing slapped sanctions on a senior Japanese lawmaker just for visiting Taiwan. What you see here is a classic diplomatic showdown. China is flexing its muscles, asserting its sovereignty claims, and punishing anyone who challenges them. And then you have Japan walking this incredibly delicate tightrope, trying to keep its regional relationships strong even if it means making Beijing furious. Meanwhile, over in Southeast Asia, you have this really significant political move. General Min Aung Hlaing, the guy who seized power in a military coup 5 years earlier, was officially nominated for president. This was a clear play to basically cement the military's grip on power, shifting from being a junta leader to a so-called political candidate. The conflict was even testing the oldest alliances. Spain, a NATO ally, took the huge step of closing its airspace to American military aircraft that were involved in the Iran conflict. This wasn't just a logistical headache for the US military, it was a really powerful political statement. It revealed a deep, deep rift right inside the Western alliance itself. But, it's so important to remember that a single day is never just about one thing. While all the headlines were screaming about conflict and crisis, there were other really important stories being written. Stories of incredible ambition, human rights, and cultural history. So on that exact same day, NASA began the final countdown for Artemis 2. And this was not just another launch. Just 2 days away, it was going to be the first time humans would fly around the moon since the Apollo era. What a powerful symbol of hope and progress and ambition, especially in a world that felt like it was on edge. A completely different story also broke through, highlighting a critical human rights issue. Advocacy groups put out a major warning about something called obstetric violence, which is the systemic abuse that people can face during childbirth. This report was focused on Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and it was a call for urgent change to protect the basic dignity of people when they're at their most vulnerable. And finally, there was this quiet story of reconciliation and history. A magnificent 3,000-year-old Bronze Age shield, one that had been in a London museum for more than 2 centuries, was finally returned home to Scotland. A small act, maybe, but one that was so deeply meaningful. It's about heritage, and it's about healing old wounds. So that was March 30th, 2026, a day of war and economic fear, sure, but also a day of political chess moves, scientific dreams, and cultural reunion. When history looks back on a day with so many sharp contrasts, which of these stories do you think will define it? Because what we choose to remember, that says just as much about us as it does about the events themselves.